very often we don't realize that what gets us promoted is most likely what will get us fired in the next job. And I've seen a lot of friends and colleagues that did not manage to do the transition properly and lost their job, they lost career. And I said, I would like to help people in that similar situation.
Welcome to A Work in Purpose. You know, we often see other people living and thriving in their purpose and think, how did they get there? Or worse, we tell ourselves, that can never be me. Well, this podcast is here to demystify that journey by sharing real, inspiring stories and actionable insights from those who have walked this path. We'll uncover how they discover their purpose, navigated the ups and downs, and faced the pivotal moments that shaped their journey, so you too can discover and step into your purpose. My name is Wing, your host, and I'm so happy to be back. I know it's been a while since my last episode. I ended up taking an unexpected year-long hiatus from this podcast. I'll be sharing more about what led to this break, my own purpose journey, and how I got to where I am now in my upcoming first ever solo episode. So stay tuned for that. But anyway, this podcast is back, and we have a lot of amazing guests lined up. I couldn't be more committed and excited than ever about A Work in Purpose 2.0. So be sure to subscribe to see what we have in store. In today's episode, I'm thrilled to share an incredible conversation with a truly inspiring guest. Whether you've just been promoted to a new leadership role, are aspiring to one, or are simply looking for advice on how to amplify your impact, this episode is packed with actionable insights to help you grow and step into your leadership potential. My guest today is Enrico Biscaro, a global executive with over 2 decades of experience leading teams around the world in countries like Malaysia, Saudi Arabia, Kazakhstan, and now in Canada. He's also a leadership coach who specializes in helping middle managers step into their full potential as leaders. In this conversation, Enrico shares invaluable insights about the often overlooked challenges of transitioning into leadership and the mindset shifts needed to succeed. He breaks down his 3 essential pillars of leadership, including building your personal leadership brand, which is a critical first step when stepping into any leadership role. We'll also dive into the concept of resonance, the foundation of his leadership philosophy, and the title of his book. You'll learn how to build trust, remove fear from the workplace, and use storytelling and feed-forward techniques to connect with your team and inspire them. Plus, Enrico shares his own journey of discovering and stepping into his own purpose. So, without further ado, let's jump into this inspiring conversation with Enrico Biscaro. Hello, Enrico Biscaro. So excited to have you on.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Wing, for having me.
So I'm really excited to talk to you because you've been a successful executive for a global company for about 2 decades, and you live all around the world like Malaysia, Saudi Arabia, and even Kazakhstan. And now you're a leadership coach based in Canada. And I love how you specifically focus on coaching middle managers to become leaders. Because when I was put into a middle manager role, all of a sudden, I realized there wasn't a lot of resources out there geared towards middle managers. Most of them were for executives. So I'm curious, what compelled you to focus on turning middle managers to become leaders?
Experience and not wanting other to go through the pain that I had to go through to move from individual contributor, small team, 5, 6 people manager, middle management, and executive. There's a lot of stuff going on in every transition that you have in your career. And those transition moments are dangerous, right? And very often we don't realize that what gets us promoted is most likely what will get us fired in the next job. And I've seen a lot of friends and colleagues that did not manage to do the transition properly and lost their job, they lost career. And I said, I would like to help people in that similar situation.
Yeah. So you mentioned that transitional periods are a dangerous period. So what is something that people, when they first step into a leadership role all of a sudden, what are some things they should do first once they step into that role?
Well, I think the first thing that you need to do when you step into leadership role, and I always use my bridge analogy, you need to build a brand for yourself, right? You don't realize it, but you're probably being promoted because your brand is to be a hard worker and to be somebody that is already on time and is reliable and works hard, etc. But that is not what is required when you lead a group of people. So when you lead a group of people, you need to decide, okay, what do I represent? What do I stand for? Which is your brand? And also remember, look at people like Gary Vee or Tim Cooks. They have more followers on LinkedIn than their own brand. Why? Because people follow people. They don't really follow brand. And so as a leader, the first thing you need to decide is that, what do I stand for? What do I want to be recognized for? And this is useful not just in front of your team, but in front of your leadership, because now you are in a difficult position. When you were an individual contributor, you had only your leader that could ask you a question, one thing. Now you are between a rock, which is your team, and a hard place, which is your leader. So quite figuratively, you need to establish your brand both for your team and your leadership. So the first thing that you should do when you get into a leadership position is, what do I stand for? Why people should follow me? And that is your brand.
So it sounds like there's a mindset shift that needs to happen for that brand, that new brand, to resonate and come out, right? And how should someone practically go about in stepping into that new brand of theirs? What are some things that they should do in the first place?
So what you need to do is, your brand is the intersection. I'm sure you've seen all those Venn diagram, and your brand is intersection on who you are, what do you stand for, right? What motivates your team to work, and what your management wants. You need to draw these three circles and say, okay, here's where I am, right? You have a team, so you need to say, okay, what motivates my team? What do my team wants out of their work, out of their career, out of their life? Draw another circle and write those things down, and then write another circle, say, what does the company want? What is the value of my manager? What does the company stand for? You find that intersection, and that's going to be your brand, and it's going to be a brand that will satisfy you, and satisfy the need of your team, and satisfy the need of your leadership.
So let's say someone does that exercise and they identify what their brand should be. Then what? Like, how do they, on a day-to-day basis, how do they let that brand come alive in a way? Let's say previously, if they've been behaving a certain way because they were in an IC level, what are some of the mental barriers to really step into that new brand? What would you recommend?
I would recommend repeating what you stand for often and loudly. So I can give you an example. I said, okay, here we are, and now I did that exercise for myself. The place where I was working was Asia Pacific. Things were not going too well. Let's put it like that. And I said, okay, what do I stand for? I stand for helping people to get result. My leadership wanted a result, so there was an immediate overlap there. And the team said, by talking, why do you come to work? Why do you get up in the morning? And say, we want to win. We want to be successful. So I said, okay, my brand here is that I'm here to make us successful and improve the result of this team. And I said it loudly. I said it consistently. You repeat this for 90 days and people will start following you. They will understand, right? And you say, okay, we want to achieve this. What is very important, and that's the next step of the process, right, is that you take responsibility for this. So now you have a brand, you decided what you stand for. And once you have that, you say, okay, I take full responsibility for this. I am responsible and accountable for the result. And what that will do, and that's the second pillar, if you want, of your journey, transformation. I have a bridge in the background. Obviously, people in the podcast don't see it, but I like the metaphor of a bridge, because a bridge ferries you from one side to another safely, right? You don't have to climb down, swim across the river. So responsibility is the second pillar. Once you define your brand, you need to assume that brand and say, I'm accountable for whatever is going to happen. When you start repeating them, when people say that you're really accountable for that, they're going to start following you because they can trust you.
Is there a third pillar?
Oh, yes. The third pillar is, of course, you need to take action. So when you're a new manager, that gets to a point where, okay, now you define your brand, everybody knows that you're going to be accountable for. Now you need to take action. And action really is, you need to have a plan for the first 90 days. That's the core of how you become a successful leader, or you successfully navigate any transition in your career, right? You need to have a plan for the first 90 days. And that is the action you need to take. You need to be detailed. You need to be aligned with your leadership and say, okay, what do you want me to achieve, right? And especially it's difficult for first-time manager, because everybody thinks that they need to change the world, right? Everybody thinks, oh, I'm a manager now, I need to come up with a vision. Leadership leaders have a vision, and you notice I never said develop a vision. As a first-time manager, you want to serve the vision of your leader. That is more important for your career than coming up with great ideas. So your action should be aimed at gaining small wins. Say your manager is called Linda. Hey, Linda, what is more important for you? What do you want me to achieve in these 90 days? You don't have to overthink it, right? She will have an idea. Deliver that, and your brand as a leader with your leadership is going to be established for a long, long time. So action is aimed at getting those small wins that will improve your brand as someone that can successfully navigate from individual contribution to first-time leader.
To sum it up, so for the first 3 pillars, people should assume a new brand, kind of like re-identify themselves with a new sort of identity, and then take responsibility for this new brand and take action. So from your experience, observing how a lot of middle managers make mistakes and pitfalls, what were they doing or not doing?
I briefly mentioned it at the beginning. You say, oh, I have a team now, I'm a leader. And everybody thinks that leaders should have this grand vision, right? And they go in and they say, this is my vision, and I want to do this, I want to do that. But they don't look around them, right? They think that because now are in the leadership position, they can decide, they can do. And we are kind of conditioned to, leader equal vision, that's the only focus. But really, in your first leadership position, you don't need that. You don't need to change everything to be successful, right? To be successful, you need to build an effective team. And here's the mistake. People don't spend time building the team.
Let's actually talk about the concept of leadership, because for me, like, I still have some queasiness about that word, because from past connotation, like, leadership often meant like being bossy or authoritarian, or having a vision and making everyone follow your vision. So what sort of advice would you give to someone like me who might have these residues of concepts about outdated versions of leadership to think of it in a different way?
Well, I talk about this in my book. It's 3 words. Leadership is service. To me, there's nothing else. And if you are in a position where you are truly serving your team, then you are a leader. And by serving your team means putting your knowledge, skill, experience at the service of the people you work with to transform them in the best version of themselves. It's incredible how much potential is untapped in people because they are not confident in themselves. Your job as a leader is to show them what they can do. Your job as a leader is to give them confidence that they can achieve the impossible. If you can do that, then you're really serving your team. And quite frankly, you don't have to worry about results anymore. You don't have to worry about your quarterly number because your team will take care of it.
Leadership is serving your team. I like that reframing. And you've used that very beautiful word to describe how leaders should approach leadership. It's also the title of your book, and that word is resonance. Can you explain what you mean by resonance?
Well, resonance is a physical phenomenon, as you know. And you can Google, there's plenty of video on YouTube, but basically resonance is when two objects vibrate on the same frequency. And, you know, if you've seen the video on YouTube, you have a tuning fork. And if you have two that have the same resonance, you don't need, you make one vibrate and the next to it will vibrate at the same frequency, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that is resonant. If you can make your team vibrate together with you, it's almost like you don't need to talk anymore to each other, right? And that is a bit pushing it, but that is resonance. And resonance, actually, it's also a very powerful physics phenomenon where basically energy becomes infinite. When an object vibrates at this resonance, usually gets destroyed. And I know this is a bit controversial. You know, I thought about, you know, what about this concept? Because yeah, it gets destroyed because energy is so powerful, right? That there's no object that can resist a resonance frequency. And so I decided to use, even if it's destructive, because to me it speaks to a place where basically there is nothing you cannot achieve when you resonate with your team.
So for someone who resonates with their leader, what exactly does that feel like? How do you know if you're resonating with your team or you're with your leader?
You know that when you can laugh, even when it's, you know, if let's say you're hanging by a thread on a cliff of the beautiful mountains, like the one you have in the background, and you can still laugh, you know you're resonating. And I had that in teams. You know, I don't have many accolades, but the best compliment I had in my career is, you know, Enrico, somebody told me, Enrico, you know, we love working with you because no matter how terrible the situation or how in trouble we are, the customer is shouting at us, everybody's screaming, and they want to see blood and they want to see, you know, people losing their job, you can still make us laugh. And so when you create that type of environment where people feel safe, even in danger, that you know that you're resonating with your team. And really that goes back to create an emotional safety, right? Creating a place where your team knows that it can count on you and vice versa. And, you know, a lot of people talk these days about, oh, you need to create safety in your, you know, where people can come and talk to you about problem, where people can feel secure to disagree with you, etc. When you know that you're resonating.
So it sounds like a lot of it has to do with taking away the fear out of the dynamic, the situation, the group.
I'm glad you say that, because that's exactly what it is.
Yeah, but for people who might be listening and wondering, how do you hold people accountable though if you don't use some sort of fear?
Well, that's the old that's the old way to manage, right? Actually, what I've always say is that you as a leader, you need to be accountable without boundaries. So what I say in a new job, every time I change my job, I say, you guys, you know, don't worry, I'm accountable. And you know, when you say this, I am accountable, what you do is to take away pressure from people. And when people work without pressure, they perform 10 times better. You know it. You don't like to work under pressure. Nobody does, right?
Mm-hmm.
Nobody likes to work. Oh, if you don't achieve this is the consequence. If you take away the consequence and say, you know, I have your back, what does that to you? It takes away the fear, and you replace with a desire to achieve, because no one, and I've seen this, no one likes you to fail. So if I tell you, you know, we've known us for 20 minutes. If I tell you, Wing, I am accountable, don't worry, you come up with solution, no matter how crazy, you know, let your creative juice flowing, etc. And I give you trust. Your first instinct is not to say, oh, I don't care about this guy, he can go under the bus. You know, you human being to human being, you want us to be successful, right? And that's the thing that has allowed me to take away fear from managing the teams that I was lucky to be part of, right? Because when you realize that when you remove fear, people actually want to do good, then everything is downhill from there.
Love that. So it sounds like in order for leaders to reach that level of resonance, one is to remove that fear and to say that they're accountable for whatever outcome will be. How else should leaders embody that sense of resonance beyond that? What are some other techniques you might recommend?
What you need to do is to make sure that your action speaks louder than your words. And you need to, you know, when you lead, what happens when you lead, and a lot of new leaders don't realize the power they have. You know, when you lead, imagine having a microscope looking at you and a telescope at the same time, right? So your team is looking at you under a microscope. When you're far, they look at you from a telescope, and every word you say, every reaction you have, every smile, every frown, every sight, it's like it goes into a database of stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you need to be consistent with your behavior. You cannot say one day one thing, the next day another, in terms of what is your brand, your core value. You know, not about changing idea, changing direction. That's the old thing about leadership, right? Admitting that you're wrong. It's not a vulnerability. It's a strength, actually. But in terms of smiling, even in the face of danger, as I said, you know, being positive, but at the same time honest with what's going on. That's how you resonate with people. Your body language, your facial expression, it's as powerful as the word as you say.
So let me imagine for someone who just became a middle manager, and like as you mentioned, there is like having a microscope and a telescope pointing at them. So I can imagine it's like a very high stress, very high pressure sort of situation. And to do it alone, a lot of people I would assume think they have to like go through that alone. How should they be vulnerable and reach out for help or support from their peers? At the same time, feeling like, oh, they need to showcase this brand of someone who's like competent or whatever their brand is. What kind of how should they balance the two?
As a leader, you need to stay in a learner lane. It means it's continuous learning. It's one of the characteristics of the leader. Whatever article you pick up, is that you always need to learn. And if you create a culture of learning in your team, then your team will know that you asking for help is not a weakness, but you're acting consistently with your brand. I want to continuously learning. I'm not finished, right? I'm in a leading position now, but that does not mean that I know everything. And I can learn from you. I can learn from my peer. I can learn from my mentor. I can get a coach. So continuous learning is exceptionally important from a leader. And by driving this type of culture, people will know that you going for help is not a weakness, but is a strength.
Yes. Yeah, I love that. Framing as a part of continuous learning.
Absolutely. That's what it is.
You also wrote in your book that storytelling is a main pillar for leaders to connect with others. Can you expand on that?
Yes, I can. I mean, we are here where we are as human being, and I believe this because 4 million years ago, somebody sat around a fire and start telling stories. I am absolutely convinced that the myth of the hunter that was the strongest and he was the most powerful and the leader, I think it's wrong, right? The most powerful person in ancient history was the guy who could tell better story. You know, how do we kill a mammoth? There's a story around that, right? And story makes us resonate with each other since the dawn of humanity. And you know why Steven Spielberg and James Cameron and Homer's before that are famous, revered, and you know looked as people who have success. What do? They tell stories, right? They don't create things. They don't invent stuff. They don't advance humanity beside telling stories. And as a leader, the story you tell is how you convince people that what you need to do is the right thing, right? And of course, it's a double-edged sword, because as a leader, you can tell bad stories or you can tell a good story, right? And the story you choose are part of your brand. So once you have chosen your brand, then you can start telling story to convince your people to follow you. In essence, you know, why we're doing this. Well, what's the story behind that? Okay, and that's very, very important.
Can you give me like a actual example of how leaders should use storytelling when they're talking with their team? Like how should they bring up and weave it into
Well,
like a conversation?
you know, a leader, very often you have to make a presentation to your team or to your leaders. I think there's another chapter in the book. I hate them. And everybody comes to me with an agenda. I say, okay, in this presentation, we're going to talk about, you know, what we want and the numbers, and it's always boring and nobody cares. So when you present to me, tell me a story, right? So who is the protagonist? What is the problem? Why do we want to solve the problem? What is the future state once the problem is solved? How are we going to feel about it? How are we going to be better? And so weave a story in your presentation to make sure that people connect with that, right? And each presentation is different, but I can guarantee you that you can put the story against everything you want to do, and those story you can draw them for your personal experience. I helped a few people with their presentation to enter very sought after training program in the company, right? And for example, someone presentation started on a story about turtles, right? The first time he came to me, he had a few bullet points why I want to do this, that, and that became a story with turtles, right? And why turtles are important, why this guy is passionate about turtle, and why they should accept him in the course, right? So yeah, it's doable.
So it sounds like storytelling, yeah, is effective when giving presentations. But what about maybe like in situations where leaders have to give one-on-one feedback or hosting meetings? are there ways for them to incorporate storytelling in those situations too?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And especially when you give one-to-one feedback, you can use a time where you were in the same situation, right? And tell the story of how you overcome that, or how you change your behavior because you've done it before, right? In a presentation, look at every TED Talk out there. Nobody starts by saying, "Oh, thanks for having me at this TED Talk." Everybody starts with a story and an anecdote or something like that. It's out there. It's everywhere. You just need to listen and make this type of storytelling part of your conversation. It takes some learning, but it's very doable.
Yeah. So it sounds like storytelling is a really effective way to humanize you, so that you can resonate with your colleagues on a more human level, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So in addition to storytelling, you wrote this concept about this technique called feed forward. Can you expand on what feed forward is and why leaders should deploy it?
Yeah, because we talk about fear a number of times, right? And I remember, okay, now you have I need to give you some feedback. Oh, everybody starts sweating, right? When I start sweating, when people ask me for feedback, what have I done wrong? That's your first thing, right? And then because I was lucky to have, good leaders, okay, I need to give you feedback. You've done things right. Here's what you could change. Da-di-da-di-da-di-da. Okay. So I thought to myself, well, what happened in the past back is gone. I cannot change that, right? I cannot influence it anymore. The only thing I can change is the future. The future is forward, right? So to take away the fear, I don't want to give feedback anymore. I want to give feed forward. So when people come and speak to me, they know that we're not going to talk about what went wrong or what was wrong or something bad happened. We're going to talk how to improve. Back to the concept, I want as a leader to make you the best version of yourself that you can be. So feed forward is exactly that. Take away the fear, talk about your future state, talk about a story where you have a problem, you overcome the problem, and now you are in a place where you win the day, so to speak.
So how should someone use feed forward? Like, what are some questions of how should they format the feedback so that it's in the form of a feed forward feedback?
Well, that's really depends on what we're talking about. And let's take an example. You made the presentation and I don't think you've given the best of yourself, right? Maybe you were not too much in the detail, you were too fluffy, as we said, and say, okay, I will ask you, what do you think about your presentation, right? And then you will tell me, okay, I think you went good and this and that. I say, okay, I will ask you, do you think you have given us enough detail to tell your story? And then you'll start thinking, no, okay, yes, maybe that's what it is. I should have given more detail. And because you're a clever person, because we have had this conversation before, you will say, I really think maybe I was missing a bit of detail in this area. I say, okay, and then I will ask you, what would you do differently the next time, right? And you will say, of course, I look at more detail, or I can, for example, talk about your body language.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, to offer questions so that the recipient of the feedback kind of thinks about it themselves and come with a solution on their own. Is that the main gist of it, or is there more to it?
Oh, that's the main gist of it. When you give feed forward, you do not want to be assertive and say you did this wrong. That is a trust killer, of course. You want to guide the person and show, make them realize what they could have done better.
Yeah, I can imagine that being very effective. Um, I think I would like to switch gears a little bit and kind of talk more about your journey. Like, how did you mentioned earlier that you went through a lot of I guess mistakes during your journey, or I've seen a lot of people make mistakes throughout their leadership journey. So I was wondering, can you share some stories of like what were some of the earlier mistakes and how did you realize that, oh, I need to like fix these with these solutions? What were some of those instances?
Well, the first instance is that the, the the biggest mistake I made is that thinking that you need to have all the solution when you start leading. That's absolutely the opposite, right? And every new leader tend to have the same problem. You're not there to provide solution anymore. You're there to guide your team to give you the best solution. And you do that by asking the right question. The ability of a leader is to ask the right question. And when do you ask the right question is when you have more experience, because you've seen what happened and you've seen alternative, right? When you are an individual contributor, it's just like, you're a hammer and everything looks like a nail to you. But there's so many ways to achieve the same result or the better result. But when you're an individual contributor, you don't see it because you've been rewarded for doing something very well. So you say, well, this is human psychology. Okay, I do this thing well, I continue to do that thing well, I'll be rewarded again. I said at the beginning that thing that you were doing so well is the thing that will get you fired in your first leadership position, because that's not your job anymore. Your job is to extract solution and, most importantly, innovation from your team.
Yeah, can you share maybe from your career when you had to learn that the hard way? What were you doing and where were you living at that time?
At the time, I was living in Israel,
Mm-hmm.
and I was overworked. I thought I had to do everything for myself. I made some big mistake. I was lucky to have a good leader that protected me, and I could continue with my career. Then I realized that I had a few people that could help me with that. And as soon as I started asking questions, then my job was much easier.
Hmm. What was the problem you're trying to solve in which you felt like you had to solve it on your own?
Oh, I was in the drilling space, so I needed to do all the work myself. I needed to provide the customer with the engineering program, with the this and that, with the tool, with the people, with the scheduling, and I thought I had to do everything to make sure that everything was perfect. But by doing that, nothing was perfect.
Hmm. And at this time, you were just promoted to become a middle manager?
I was the first time that I had a middle management position and also a position where I was responsible for the financial results.
Oh, wow. And how long did it take for you to come up with these realization that, oh, that wasn't the right approach at all?
About 6 months.
Can you share more about like how did you come up with these insights? So I would imagine a lot of people after they get promoted and they continue making the same mistake. What did you do differently that helped you to see the situation for what it really is and come up with these new approaches?
Step by step, you realize that you need to trust people to get the job done, right? If you are a perfectionist, if you are someone that is very proud of your job, that works very hard, which is usually the case when you get promoted to a leadership position, right? You need to realize that you need to trust your team. And once you realize that you need to trust people, even before they deliver what you want, that frees you. That make you free, right? Because then you don't have those barrier anymore, that voice in the back of your mind that always, no, I cannot trust him or her to do a good job. I need to micromanage, supervise, and you don't realize that actually trust will free you and will free the person that you're leading to become the best version of both of you, actually. And that is something that you need to take a leap of faith every time. And you can take that leap of faith when you're really, really confident in your capability. Okay. And that very often you don't have that when you lead for the first time, because you are fearful. You're fearful of failure. You're fearful of letting go. And that's why it's very important that, and I was lucky that you have a good leader that will say, you're allowed to take risk. You're allowed to be confident because I trust you. And so trust is a liberator, actually.
So you've learned all those lessons throughout your career, and now you're training other middle managers on how to be leaders that resonate with their teams. So I'm wondering, where would you say you're at on your journey towards your purpose? We're going to shift gears and talk about your purpose. Would you say that you found it, or you living your purpose?
I've been living my purpose for the past 20 years, and now I am, I'm still helping people improving their result in the workspace through better managing their team.
So at what point did you realize that that is your purpose? And how would you define what your purpose is?
Well, my purpose is really to serve others, to become their better version of themselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I realized the importance of service at a very young age. When I was like 7, 8 years old, I was in the Boy Scout, and I was going to the summer camp, and I was looking at this young adult teenager that, instead of going to the beach with their friends and have fun, partying, they were coming with a bunch of 6, 7, 8 years old, noisy and loud and crazy, and spending a week, 2 weeks with them to play, to cook, to clean for them, and so they could just have fun, right? And they were doing it for free, without anything in return, or seemingly anything in return. So then I understood, okay, if they're doing this, there's a reason for that. And then, of course, I grew, and I became that teenager that was taking the kids for the summer camp, and I realized, oh, this is good. There is fulfillment in helping others that maybe they could not afford otherwise to go on vacation, or they could not do this fun experience. There's fulfillment in that. And that's where I realized that, yeah, serving others is a good purpose.
That's amazing that you've realized your purpose at such a young age. A lot of people go through life thinking about, oh, what is my purpose their whole life? And then, yeah, so that's great to hear. I'm curious to hear. So now that you are coaching others on how to become better leaders, what was that transitional process like for you to step from being in the corporate world to become this coach that you are now?
I was not fulfilling my purpose in the corporate leadership role anymore. And that eventually eroded the trust that I had with my leadership. And we decided it was better to part ways. And I decided that I wanted to really go into the coaching business, right? Because then you don't have the pressure of delivering result no matter what. But really, you can fulfill your purpose of helping others to deliver the result they want.
So it sounds like at some point in your corporate career, you did feel like you were serving your purpose, but then it just stopped one day, or was it like a long process? Like, how did you come to
No,
that realization?
it was not one day, it took about a year to evolve into something where I was not comfortable in anymore.
Hmm. And when you were going through that process, what was the impetus for you to make that big change? Like, how long did you plan out or think about this transition to become a coach and then decide to finally do it? What was that like?
Scary.
Oh,
You like in any transition, right? It's scary to think that you've done something for so many years and now you don't do it anymore. But I think what is very important here, and really an advice I would give to any new manager, don't identify yourself with your job or your career. That's why your brand is very important, right? Then why I would advise your brand should never be, oh, I want to make a career, right? That's not a brand, that's an ambition. A lot of people, and if you look at your own LinkedIn and see a lot of coaches coach people that had a career, now they don't have the career anymore. What's my purpose? What I'm doing here? Never identify yourself with your job.
yeah, that's great advice. Thank you for sharing that. I'm curious, so how did you personally maybe adjusted your brand or rethink what your brand is during this transitional period?
I probably think that my brand does not really change. I still want to help others. Um, and 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 so you look for a job or a coaching where your purpose is aligned to the company purpose. So now you choose, instead of you are very discerned about which company you work for, because you want your purpose aligned with the purpose of the company. So I did not really change my brand. I think what I did, I said, okay, this is my brand, what I'm going to do to be aligned with it.
Mm, yeah, so you took actions to act, be even more aligned with your brand, it sounds like, right?
Yes, exactly.
So what would you recommend to people who might be kind of stuck in their comfort zone, but they know that they're not living up to their potential or purpose or in alignment with the brand? What do you suggest to these people on how they can get better alignment?
Ask for help. You're not going to resolve this on your own, because and this happened to me as well, by the way. You're too immersed in yourself, and I'm sure you felt that at one point in your life. You just go in circle,
Mm,
right?
mm,
You go in circle, you need to speak with someone that can ask the right question, so it breaks that spiral, right? Breaks that spiral that makes you fearful and makes you unconfident in your capability. We tend to stay in our comfort zone because we know that we can function there, right? Stepping outside your comfort zone, you do that when other tells you that you can do that. Others trust you. Once again, the importance of giving trust, right? And so my advice would get help to get clarity.
mm. What's that? What's a question that someone can ask to seek out help in this regard?
The question you can ask someone that I think you don't need to ask the question. The person that helps you should ask you the question. You need to be honestly expressing what are your real feelings, right? And say, okay, that's where I am. Again, things about a story. You're a hero of your story, right? So where are you now? how being where you are, how does that make you feel? And then try and imagine what is the, skip all the part where you're fighting the monster and, cut the head of the Medusa or fight Darth Vader and all that stuff. Skip that and goes, okay, what is the end of the story? Where do I want to be? Right? And once you've defined that, where you want to be, then you say, okay, what is going to take me from where I am now to there? Who do I need to fight? Do I need to take a golden ring to Mordor? That's the story. But if you don't know where you want to be, you're never going to get there.
So having an end goal or the end of the story in mind is helpful to get started along the journey. Do you think the destination will change once you start your journey, or should we maintain this original end story that we have?
Every story can have a different ending, right? What you want is that no matter how different the ending is, the way you feel about the ending is the way you want to feel inside. Right?
Mm-hmm.
It's the feeling that is important, not how the story ends. You can be fulfilled by being in a marriage. You can be fulfilled by having a lot of money. You can be fulfilled by traveling. You can be fulfilled by serving others. There's many ways you can be happy and content with yourself, right? So it's not so much how the story will end, but no matter how the story will end, will you be happy with yourself? Will you wake up in the morning and say, I'm where I should be?
I love that. Wow, that's great advice. And on that note, I think we should move on to the lightning round now.
Oh, perfect.
All right. What is one thing you like to do to relax?
Running.
What is one thing you like to do for fun?
Watching movies.
What is one thing that makes you enthusiastic?
Serving others.
And what is one habit you always do for a great day?
Running.
What is one habit you are working on?
Writing better.
What's the most important lesson you've ever learned? What's the first thing that comes to mind?
Everything changes. Nothing is forever.
And what is a book that changed your life, if you had to think of one?
On the Road by Jack Kerouac.
Oh yeah, how so?
It resonated with me because it was doing what I wanted to do. And it showed me that I was not crazy by thinking that traveling the world and meeting new people and making new experience and getting outside your comfort zone was a thing that was okay to do.
Let's actually talk a little bit more about that. You've had a very interesting life from what I've seen. You live all around the world. Can you just like give us a quick story of how that happened and where you live?
I was in a train station when I was about 12 or 13. I live near Venice. So I was just waiting for the train to get to Venice, and the train stopped, and off the train these young kids with backpack and laughing and having fun and going around and with their tents and their sleeping bag. And I remember I know memories are a bit flimsy, but this is something that I remember, my parents remember. I told them I want to become like them when I grow up. And something I've always wanted to do, to travel the world. And then I said, okay, what do I need to do to travel the world? And this was way before the digital nomad and all this stuff. And I said, well, how can I help others and travel the world? So I thought about initially I wanted to travel the world looking for dinosaurs. That's also in my book. But then I said, well, a dinosaur is a bit too solitary for me. I had this impulse of serving people, and I thought, Well, what is something that everybody needs? Everybody needs energy, oil and gas. It's a global business. So I said, well, maybe I can marry my desire to travel with serving other by providing energy, working to light a bulb in the evening, providing cool when it's hot, warm when it's cold. And there you go. I merged the two, and I started working in the oil and gas industry, and I traveled the world.
Nice. Also with fossil fuel, dinosaurs too are somewhat related, right?
Yeah, you can sell it as that. Actually, that's a myth, but that's okay.
Right. Yeah. Someone just corrected me recently about that too. Well,
I sold it like that to myself. So
yeah. What were some of like the favorite countries that you lived in, or maybe more not so favorite?
I would say Malaysia for sure. And the reason being is because somehow in a country with so many different cultures, so many different people, so many different ethnicity, they manage to live in peace with each other and actually draw from each other diversity to be even better. I doubt I met kinder people than I met in Malaysia. I doubt that I have felt more welcome than I felt in Malaysia. Malaysia is truly Asia, as they have a very good brand, and from there you can travel around in some of the most beautiful places in the world. So yeah, Malaysia would be my choice.
Yeah, someone just telling me about how Malaysia is such an amazing place to visit. I happen to love Malaysian food, so that's on my list.
Yeah, right on. It's very good.
Yeah. All right, so if you're not doing what you are doing today, what would you be doing instead?
It's a question I was not prepared for. See, a lot of people have asked me, do you have any regrets? And I've always said, no, that I don't really have any. So I think I would be doing the same thing.
Right on. And how would you describe your ideal life?
Being able to travel, being able to meet different people, and being able to challenge my conviction every day.
And lastly, do you have any requests you would like our listeners to do?
No, not really. If you enjoy this conversation, just share it with your friends and family. That's it.
Sounds great, Enrico. So where can people find you?
Well, they can find me on LinkedIn. Just Google Enrico Biscaro and you're going to find me. There's not many. I have a website, which is enricob.com. My book has got a website as well. It's called resonancestory.com, and maybe you can put a link in your podcast page or whatever. So yeah, you can Google me and you'll find me.
Sounds great. Yeah, I'll have all those links in the show notes. Enrico Biscaro, this was such an insightful conversation. Thank you so much for sharing all of your really wonderful insights about leadership, resonance, and sharing your life story too. Thank you so much for being a part of this podcast.
Thank you for having me.
And that wraps up this inspiring conversation with Enrico Biscaro. I hope you gained as much insight as I did from his inspiring stories and practical advice about leadership, resonance, and stepping into your purpose. From building your personal leadership brand to removing fear from the workplace and creating trust, Enrico's approach reminds us that leadership isn't about authority, it's about service and empowering others to achieve their best. If you've enjoyed this episode, I would love it if you share it with a friend, colleague, or anyone who's navigating their own leadership or purpose journey. And don't forget to check out all the ways you can connect with Enrico, his LinkedIn, his book, Resonance, and his website. I'll have all the links in the show notes, so be sure to take a look. We have so many more amazing conversations coming up, so if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss a thing. Until next time, thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode of A Work in Purpose.